These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. In Imperial China, the kangwei was a locked wooden collar that could weigh from 10 to 100 pounds and kept a person on display from the Song dynasty to 1912. With hands held inside the board, many had to rely on strangers to eat. This photograph from French-ruled Algeria shows a colonial trooper leading two detained men with a restraint rope. From 1830 to 1962, France ruled Algeria, and scenes like this reveal how power was often enforced in plain sight. In August 1917 at Ouessant, France, French sailors posed beside the stranded German submarine UC-61 after it ran aground and split open. Its exposed gears and wires show how tightly early submarines were built. In 1956 at the Giro d'Italia, Fiorenzo Magni kept racing after a crash broke his left collarbone, using a custom strap device to steady the handlebar and change gears. After another crash broke his upper arm, he still finished all 23 stages in second place. In September 1900, a storm surge in Galveston, Texas, lifted this Avenue N house off its foundation and rotated it almost sideways. The shock led Galveston to build a concrete seawall and raise large parts of the city with fill to sit higher above the water. In 1940, a German leader walked through the World War I trenches near Fromelles in northern France, returning to a place linked to his early military years. The visit was photographed for propaganda to frame the past as destiny and turn a muddy trench into a political message. In August 1933, Blanche Barrow, linked to Bonnie and Clyde, is arrested on a rural roadside as officers close in. She weighed only 81 pounds and outlived everyone from that group, dying in 1988. In 1966, 17-year-old Franca Viola shocked Italy by refusing a rehabilitating marriage after being kidnapped to force her into silence. Her stand helped drive change that ended the rule in 1981 that let an attacker escape punishment by marrying the victim. A teenage boy sits with his mother. His ultra-rare craniodiaphyseal dysplasia made skull bones grow so thick that his face changed over time. His life later inspired the film Mask in 1985, and he died at 16 in 1978. On June 28, 1998, mankind accidentally fell about 16 feet from the top of the hell in a cell cage into the ring as The Undertaker watched. This image captures the split second when a planned spectacle turned real and the medical team took control. On April 29, 1945, newly freed prisoners at Dachau in Germany confront a former guard as soldiers secure the area nearby. The photo shows how liberation could shift into sudden street-level justice when years of control fell apart in minutes. Poland, April 1945. A German camp official is made to hold a sign admitting he took part in the deaths of Poles at a factory site in 1939. Such forced confession photos were used as proof and propaganda, turning one man into a warning as the old system collapsed. In December 1972, North and South Vietnamese troops stepped into the no-man's land between their trenches during a rare Christmas truce. The photo proves that even at the front line, a war can pause for minutes when both sides choose silence. In April 1945 at Dora Mittelbau, a former prisoner escorts a captured guard as American troops watch the scene unfold. The camp's prisoners were forced to work in underground tunnels building weapons, so this photo freezes the moment power flipped in a single courtyard. One of the last known photos of wrestler Andre the Giant was taken in Paris in 1993 during a quiet family visit after a major loss. His rare hormone disorder kept his body growing, and he passed away in his sleep 3 days later at age 46. Sid Hatfield, police chief of Matawan, West Virginia, shocked powerful coal bosses by backing striking miners during the mine wars era. In 1921, he was shot in public on the courthouse steps, turning him into a symbol of how dangerous labor politics had become. In 1980, Paul McCartney was detained at Tokyo Airport after officials found illegal plant material in his luggage. He spent 10 days in custody, his Japan tour collapsed overnight, and he was deported instead of being tried there. This pickup belonged to Ken McElroy in Skidmore, Missouri, photographed with shattered windows after he died in public on July 10, 1981. More than 40 people were present, yet nobody gave evidence that solved the case, so no one has ever been charged. This is Joe Raggio in 1931, photographed at a table where everyday objects looked tiny against his size. Images like this were often staged for newspapers to show how extreme body weight could reshape simple tasks like eating and moving. This 1967 aerial photo shows industrial waste streaking into the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, turning the water into a visible plume. 2 years later, the river caught fire, and the shock helped push major United States water pollution reforms. Fedor Makhnov, often called the Russian giant, is shown towering at about 2.39 meters in this early 20th century Paris photo. His height came from abnormal growth, and postcards like this turned real people into living spectacles for curious crowds. Otto Skorzeny, born June 12, 1908, became famous for a glider raid in 1943 that freed Benito Mussolini from captivity on a mountain in Italy. The stunt was filmed and reported worldwide, turning one rescue into a legend that followed him for the rest of World War II. Belgrade's Topčider railway station on October 12, 1944, after retreating German forces sabotaged the tracks. Twisted rails like these could stop supply trains for days and slow the final push for the city. This poster lists the 10 men who died during the 1981 Irish hunger strike in Northern Ireland, part of a campaign for political prisoner status. Their deaths triggered mass protests and reshaped politics, including Bobby Sands being elected to Parliament while still on strike. At Tatsinskaya Airfield in 1942, Heinkel, 111 crews gather around a burning coffin to stage a grim farewell before their next mission. The base fed the Stalingrad airlift, and the coffin slogan, "Your life, your reward," shows how uncertain a return could be. This 1933 home movie shows a young British royal family member copying an adult's raised arm gesture that later became linked to extremist politics. The clip resurfaced decades later because it reveals how casual private moments can look chilling. Anna Nicole Smith, 26, poses in 1994 with oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall, 89, shortly after their wedding, stunned the media. After he passed away the next year, the fight over his fortune turned into a famous case that reached the United States Supreme Court. In 1941, Soviet authorities deported thousands of Estonians to remote parts of Siberia, packing families into rail cars like this. On June 14, around 10,000 people were taken in a single day, and many never returned. This circa 1863 studio card names Isaac and Rosa, 2 enslaved children in New Orleans, photographed as people could still be treated like property. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, slavery continued where Union control did not reach. In May 1945 in Algeria, protests in towns like Sétif and Guelma were met by a harsh colonial crackdown, and this lineup shows the fear and control on the streets. Death toll estimates still swing from a few thousand to tens of thousands. This photo shows Jenny Wanda Barkman, a guard at the Stutthof camp, standing beside a huge pile of shoes taken from prisoners' confiscated belongings. In 1946, she was convicted in the Stutthof trials, and images like this helped fix responsibility to a real face. At Kiel shipyard in 1940, the German battleship Gneisenau is shown with a massive breach in its armored side after a submarine attack. The jagged opening reveals the hidden layers of plates and frames that let a giant warship survive hits and return to sea. At Brazil's Serra Pelada gold mine in 1986, a miner grabs a soldier's weapon during a tense standoff as thousands watch from the dirt slope. At its peak, up to 100,000 people dug this pit by hand, hauling heavy bags up ladders in a scene nicknamed the Human Anthill. Nizhny Novgorod Province, 1902. A barefoot peasant father stands with his sons in homespun clothing dyed by dirt and hard work. The Russian Empire was still mostly rural then, and many families survived on tiny plots while paying taxes and rent to landowners. This is a playful school strike photo from the 1970s, often shared online as showing a young Barack Obama holding a sign about homework. October 1933. Adolf Hitler speaks into a radio microphone to announce Germany's withdrawal from the League of Nations, a public break with the post-war order. He then used a national referendum to stage approval. In West Germany in 1951, thousands gathered outside Landsberg prison to demand amnesty for imprisoned war criminals. The crowd includes families, showing how fast old loyalties could reappear in public even after the war ended. In 1971, in Durham, North Carolina, Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis were forced to co-chair a school desegregation committee despite starting as bitter enemies. Working side by side flipped Ellis's views so completely that he later left the Ku Klux Klan and publicly tore up his membership card. Built in 1941 for the Deutsche Reichsbahn, the streamlined steam locomotive 1001 was shaped for high-speed express travel and tested near 175 kilometers per hour. Stalingrad, summer 1942. The same improvised trench line is shown from a rarer angle, with soldiers using a rail embankment as instant cover. The bent track and torn ground reveal how fast a normal city edge can become a battlefield map in one afternoon. In 1925, a bulletproof vest was demonstrated in a radio studio by firing into the protected target to prove it could stop a shot. Public stunts like this helped turn early body armor from a rumor into a product people could trust. Hannibal Barca shocked Rome in 218 before Christ by marching from Iberia across the Alps with tens of thousands of troops and war elephants. The famous line, "Either I will find a way or I will make one," is widely shared, but not a confirmed quote from ancient sources, which makes it a legend built on his real feat. In 1952, on the Paluxy River in Texas, workers lifted a slab of limestone that preserved dinosaur footprints like wet cement turned to stone. The tracks come from the early Cretaceous, roughly 110 million years ago, so this is a real walkway frozen in deep time. Houston, Texas, 1904. Railway yards packed with cotton bales waiting to be shipped, turning the crop into a landscape of white blocks. Rail hubs like this helped Texas become a global cotton powerhouse, moving harvests fast to Gulf ports and textile mills. Weatherford, Texas, May 1939. A giant watermelon monument stands like a small building, photographed by Russell Lee during the Great Depression. It was local advertising with civic pride, turning a crop into a roadside landmark that made travelers stop and talk. This is Sir Hiram Maxim's Pipe of Peace, a menthol inhaler kit sold for asthma and breathing trouble in the early 1900s by the same inventor famous for the Maxim gun. Users heated and inhaled medicated vapor, a reminder that old medicine often mixed bold marketing with limited proof. In 1958, teenage John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison played as the quarrymen at small gigs like weddings to earn money and practice. Within a few years, this scrappy lineup evolved into the Beatles, but here they still look like local kids chasing a bigger sound. Somme Front, October 15, 1916. A French Army mobile shop rolls up with shelves of food and small essentials like a tiny store on wheels. This kind of supply cart boosted morale by letting soldiers buy comforts close to the trenches instead of waiting for rare leave. Soviet Union, 1960s. Workers assemble a compact MT-3 tractor built for construction, road services, and small farms where big machines could not fit. Mass production posters above the line show the real goal, turning factories into numbers that prove the state's promise of mechanized labor. On January 20th, 1953, a cowboy performer tosses a lasso toward President Dwight D. Eisenhower during an inaugural parade show. It looks wild, but it was a stage stunt meant to highlight Western rodeo skill for the cameras. This 1870 studio photo shows Ottoman Bashi bazooks, irregular soldiers famous for dramatic dress, mixed local weapons, and loose organization. They were often used for scouting and frontier campaigns, and their weak discipline made them unpredictable even to their own commanders. In 1932, Surgeon Evan O'Neill Kane performed a hernia operation on himself, staying awake under local anesthetic while his team assisted. He did it to prove many operations could be done without full sleep drugs, turning one operating room into a live medical argument. This 1933 photo shows Adolf Hitler seated at a beer hall table, surrounded by supporters packed in close for the camera. The tight crowd and casual setting were used to project an image of access and loyalty while he consolidated power. Pakistan, August 22, 2011. A convoy of fuel tankers bound for coalition forces burns along a highway, filling the sky with thick smoke. The damage cut a key supply line into Afghanistan, showing how hitting logistics can stop an army faster than a battlefield loss. In 1938, 20-year-old Robert Wadlow stands beside his father, already towering at about 2.72 meters, the tallest person ever reliably recorded. His extreme height came from an overactive pituitary gland, and he needed leg braces to walk because his bones and nerves carried impossible strain. In June 1920, stunt pilot Ormer Locklear stands on the wing of a Curtiss JN-4 Jenny biplane while it flies over a city. These daredevil wing walks were early airshow headlines, and Locklear later brought the same stunts to Hollywood before dying in a filming crash. Iowa, 1959. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev laughs as he pats an American farmer's belly during a Goodwill stop on his United States visit. The moment became famous because it looked like pure small talk, yet it happened at the peak of the Cold War. New York, 1939. RCA executives sit in their office watching one of the first televisions just before the technology was shown to the public. That year, the New York World's Fair became the big debut stage, turning a tiny glowing screen into the next mass medium. In 1915, Russian Imperial Army soldiers fire Winchester Model 1895 rifles in a muddy First World War trench. Russia bought these lever-action Winchesters in huge numbers because domestic rifle output could not keep up with the war's demand. In 1906, a maid uses an early household vacuum, a loud metal machine on wheels that replaced beating carpets by hand. These first models were heavy and expensive, so they spread through wealthy homes before becoming a normal apartment tool. Germany, 1944. Adolf Hitler shakes hands with Benito Mussolini through a train window during one of their last meetings. Within a year, Mussolini was captured and killed, and Hitler died in Berlin, ending the alliance in total collapse. January 6, 1982. 3 captured Soviet soldiers sit in a Mujahideen mountain camp during the Soviet-Afghan War. The photo shows how the conflict spread into remote valleys where small groups and prisoner exchanges could matter as much as big battles. Sylvia Hardy, born in 1824, stood about 2.13 meters tall and drew crowds in 19th century traveling shows. After leaving the stage, she reinvented herself as a spiritualist medium, selling seances until her death in 1888. In 1945, abandoned Messerschmitt. Me-262 jets sit lined up in a field, the first operational jet fighters ever used in combat. Many ended up stranded by fuel shortages, damaged runways, and a collapsing supply system, so the future was left to rust in the grass. Novorossiysk, 1943. German troops stagger out of a street battle in the Black Sea port, faces coated in dust and shock. The city became a turning point after the Soviet Malaya Zemlya beachhead helped trigger a major push that retook Novorossiysk that September. 1939. Hitler Youth boys approach Adolf Hitler for a public donation moment staged for the camera. Scenes like this were used to sell the idea that the regime's youth groups were normal civic life, not a political machine. This is auto polo, a 1910s and 1920s stunt sport where drivers swung mallets from moving cars like a motorized version of horse polo. Spectators loved it, but the cars were wrecked so often that venues and insurers stopped hosting it. This 1870 pistol ring, nicknamed the Perfect Protector, hid a tiny single-shot barrel in jewelry with a small tool to reload it. It used miniature 3mm cartridges, showing how far Victorian inventors pushed pocket protection into everyday objects. In 1946, United States Navy leaders celebrated Operation Crossroads by cutting a cake shaped like a mushroom cloud after the nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll. The goal was to measure how ships and crews would handle the new force, and this party photo became a surreal symbol of the early nuclear age. A boy pushes a handmade wooden bicycle with simple wheels and a plank frame, built to work on rough roads with whatever materials were available. It is a sharp reminder that for many kids, a bike means pure mobility, not a brand or the newest model. Panama Canal, 1922. A massive concrete lock chamber sits empty as workers maintain the floor and gates that lift ships step by step. Each transit can raise a vessel about 26 meters to Gotten Lake, letting oceans meet without sailing around South America. New York City, 1986. A giant parade balloon droops low over the rain-soaked street during the Thanksgiving Day procession. Cold air and heavy rain can reduce balloon lift, so crews use ropes and handlers to keep it clear of buildings and traffic lights. Around 1920 at Celilo Falls on the Columbia River, fishermen used long spears to snag salmon as the current blasted past their feet. The falls were later submerged in 1957 when the Dallas Dam was completed, erasing a legendary fishing site in a single day. In 1948, a worker inspects a massive forged magnet assembly made for a cyclotron, where magnetic fields bend charged particles into tight circles. Magnets like this could weigh many tons, and their precise shape controlled whether the beam stayed stable or slammed into the machine walls. New York Harbor, 1942. The French liner Normandy lies on her side, exposing giant propellers after she capsized during a rushed refit. The ship was being converted into a troop transport when a fire and the weight of firefighting water sealed her fate in a single night. Manchuria, 1940. Japanese soldiers sculpt a snow figure of Chiang Kai-shek, turning an enemy leader into a winter caricature for a camp joke. Even in wartime, propaganda and humor mixed, using a simple snowman to make politics feel personal. In 1922, Arthur Conan Doyle meets actor Aile Norwood, whose silent film Sherlock Holmes roles shaped the detective's screen image before sound movies. Norwood played Holmes 47 times, and his cool, precise style became the template later actors copied. Neubiberg, Germany, 1957. United States Air Force personnel celebrate Oktoberfest with a playful party game inside a packed hall. The scene captures how post-war bases blended American crowds with Bavarian traditions, turning a military posting into a local festival night. Warsaw, 1944. An occupying soldier uses a flame device to ignite a building during the planned clearing of the city after the uprising. By 1945, about 85% of Warsaw lay in ruins, making it one of Europe's most damaged capitals. In 1916, during the First World War, Emperor Nicholas II greets soldiers of a railway regiment during an Easter Christ is Risen ritual. Within a year, the Russian Empire collapsed in revolution, turning this calm line of faces into a last snapshot of the old order. May 1942. A Soviet P-8 bomber sits at Dundee, Scotland, after flying Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov on a secret diplomatic mission to Britain. The same aircraft later carried the delegation onward to the United States, proving this bomber could also be a long-range political courier. Berlin, May 1945. frontline film cameramen Alexander and Evgeny Alexeyev record the ruined city just after the fighting ends. Their footage shaped how millions later saw victory, turning a few seconds of film into national memory. Leningrad, early 1940s. Local militia received Canadian Ross Model 1910 rifles, a First World War purchase pulled from storage for emergency defense. The Ross was accurate, but famously finicky. So reusing it shows how desperate shortages can turn old stock into frontline gear. Rows of Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighters are parked nose-up for compact storage, turning a field into a vertical aircraft rack. After World War II, huge numbers of surplus planes were stacked, stripped for parts, and sold as scrap because keeping them flying cost more than building new models. 1942. A horse in a German military veterinary hospital has its head sealed in a chamber for a gas treatment used against skin parasites. Even in a mechanized war, armies depended on horses for transport and artillery, so keeping them healthy was a strategic job. Hamburg, 1963. Activists lie on the sidewalk to demonstrate duck and cover behavior for a nuclear air raid. The street theater mocked civil defense advice, showing how many people felt that simple drills could not protect a modern city. Alain Delon is photographed in the 1950s, stylish in a light suit and carrying luggage like an emerging movie star on the move. Within a few years, he became a European icon through films like Purple Noon in 1960 and Le Samouraï in 1967. In 1897, an Arizona Masonic lodge held a full meeting inside a cavern, turning a natural chamber into a ceremonial hall. The staged group photo captures how fraternal groups used unusual public spectacles to attract members in the frontier era. On June 26, 1954, the Obninsk plant in the Soviet Union began producing electricity from nuclear power, often cited as the first grid-connected nuclear power station. Inside its control room, operators watched analog gauges and switches that guided a new kind of heat source with almost no room for error. Moscow, 1932. An American engineer works at the Moscow automobile plant, learning the shop floor tools during the Soviet industrial push. Foreign specialists were hired to train crews and tune assembly lines, helping jumpstart mass production in the early 1930s. Winter parade lines of Soviet troops march past the Kremlin, showing how the entire country was turned into a fighting machine. Estimates say men born in 1923 suffered one of the worst losses, with about 4 out of 5 never coming home. Britain, 1949. A family of 3 poses behind 4 months of groceries laid out like an inventory, because rationing still shaped daily life after the war. Meat, sugar, fats, and sweets were tightly limited, so this neat display shows how carefully households planned every meal. Croatia, 1995. President Franjo Tuđman stands with General Ante Gotovina during Operation Storm, as cameras record a defining moment of the Yugoslav wars. The offensive retook large areas within days and reshaped the map, but it also left a long trail of disputes over what happened to civilians who fled. London, December 1, 1905. Crowds in long coats and hats pack a department store entrance for the start of the holiday shopping rush. This season opening was a social event when window displays and new electric lighting turned buying gifts into city theater. In 1991, this image captures a nearly empty United States House chamber during late-night debate when cameras kept rolling even without a crowd. The caption says Bernie Sanders spoke here, warning against military action in the Gulf, a reminder that some of the biggest speeches are delivered to silence. 1946 in Mandatory Palestine. A British soldier poses by a simple playground seesaw, not knowing its base is really a hidden air vent to an underground room. When it was uncovered, investigators reported a secret stockpile with over 300 firearms and huge amounts of ammunition. July 1944. Adolf Hitler is photographed in profile shortly after the failed assassination attempt with a tight, stunned stillness in his face. The bomb plot triggered a massive crackdown that swept up thousands of suspects within days. Louisiana, 1964. Reverend Joe Carter stands on his porch at night, holding a gun after registering to vote and expecting a Ku Klux Klan visit. The silhouette captures the reality that voting rights work often meant facing real intimidation at your own front door. 1947. Jewish refugees crowd a ship approaching Palestine, hanging a banner that pleads, "The Germans destroyed our families and homes, do not destroy our hopes." The photo freezes the tense moment when survivors faced closed borders, interceptions at sea, and an uncertain future even after the war ended. April 9, 1968. Jacqueline Kennedy clasps Coretta Scott King's hands at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral, a quiet meeting of two women shaped by national tragedy. The image links two eras of American grief, with the cameras catching comfort passed person to person, not speech to crowd. This photo is often captioned as Huey P. Newton meeting armed men at a refugee camp in Lebanon in 1980, showing how the Black Panther Party reached far beyond the United States. The real twist is that the Panthers once ran an international office from Algiers. National Guard troops advance across the Kent State campus as tear gas smoke drifts over student protesters. May 1970. Days earlier, the United States announced the Cambodia invasion, and the clash helped ignite one of the largest student strikes in American history. John Elton Bembry is photographed at Massachusetts State Prison on May 14, 1943. He later mentored Malcolm X in Norfolk, urging daily reading that helped shape Malcolm's future speeches and politics. New Zealand division cooks use rough field stoves to make Christmas dinner in Italy on December 25, 1943. Even close to the front, hot meals were a morale tool, with cooks stretching rations to feed hundreds. A former Japanese prime minister sits at the defendant desk during the Tokyo Tribunal in 1946. These hearings helped shape the modern idea that top leaders can be held personally responsible under international law. Santa stands on a Chicago sidewalk in 1902, collecting donations for the Volunteers of America. The stiff mask and bold street signs show how early charity drives used theater to turn spare coins into winter help. A U.S. Master Sergeant opens his Christmas parcel and shares it with children in San Benedetto, Italy, in 1944. It shows how simple gifts from home became a small supply line for morale and kindness during a hard winter. A rare daguerreotype shows New Hampshire militia lined up before departure in 1846. It is among the earliest photo records of United States forces heading to the Mexico campaign. A Sami herder braces in deep snow as a reindeer jerks against the rope in Finland, 1949. Sami reindeer herding often uses a long lasso called a suopunki, and trained reindeer can pull sleds across winter tundra for many miles. An Australian soldier sits with his little son on his knee, steadying him with one arm. After the Gallipoli campaign in 1915, he lived without sight, and this photo shows how family life carried on through the First World War. Teenage German prisoners stand in the snow by the Sauer River as an American soldier checks their coats, January 1945. By 1945, shortages pushed Germany to send many boys still in school to the front lines. This is a 1910 portrait of Benjamin Guggenheim, a wealthy American businessman who later sailed on the Titanic. During the Titanic disaster in 1912, he reportedly changed into formal evening clothes and chose to stay aboard, telling staff to tell his family he faced the end with honor. In 1944, pilot Billy Harris never came home, leaving his bride Peggy with only this wedding photo. In 2005, she learned a small French town had honored his name for more than 60 years. On December 24, 1948, Joseph Gutmann clings to Master Sergeant William Best, the American soldier who helped free him and later adopted him. This is one of the rare reunion photos where a rescue did not end at the gate, but became a lifelong family. In Wales in 1921, 15-year-old Harold Jones stood outside a shop wearing a gold watch given to him after a court cleared him in a young girl's death. Weeks later, another local girl died, and investigators linked both cases to him, turning the cheers into a dark lesson about rush justice. In April 1944, Montgomery Ward Chief Sewell Avery was carried out by soldiers after refusing a federal labor order. The government then took temporary control of the retailer, so war production and deliveries would not stall. Charles Boyd Harrelson, father of actor Woody Harrelson, is seen in court during his 1980s trial, linked to the death of a federal judge. He was found guilty and sentenced to 2 life prison terms. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on May 27, 1972, comedian George Carlin was taken into custody right after his 7 words routine. The incident helped push a free speech fight that later shaped a major United States Supreme Court ruling on what radio and television could broadcast. In 1933, a German World War I veteran stands outside his shop wearing the Iron Cross he earned in the trenches. A uniformed party guard is posted at the door to signal public shaming as the new regime tightened its grip. During the 1956 Hungarian uprising, a street fighter hides a homemade fire bottle behind his back while walking past patrols. The cloth-wick glass jar shows how ordinary people turned everyday supplies into quick weapons for city battles. In Times Square in 1969, John Lennon and Yoko Ono rented a giant billboard that shouted, "War is over if you want it." It was part of their War is Over campaign, with matching billboards placed in major cities to push a simple peace message into everyday street life. At a campaign stop in Amarillo, Texas, in 1960, Lyndon Johnson sharply gestures at nearby pilots to shut down their plane engines. John Kennedy tries to calm him at the microphones, a rare shot of how a simple noise could derail a headline speech and the look of teamwork on stage. Anne Frank smiles at a school desk in Amsterdam, years before she began the diary that would circle the world. In 1944, she started rewriting her diary after hearing a radio appeal to save everyday stories, which is why 2 versions of her own words exist. In February 1926, this snapshot reportedly shows Franklin Delano Roosevelt fishing in Florida beside British politician Oswald Mosley and Mosley's wife. Roosevelt had been rebuilding strength after his 1921 polio illness, and these calm boat moments later looked wildly different from the pressure he faced as president. A rare 1931 photo shows Joseph Stalin in the background, while his daughter Svetlana sits on the lap of Lavrenti Beria, a top security boss. The picture feels calm, but Beria later became one of the most feared men in the Soviet system. Ira Hayes, a Pima United States Marine, was one of the 6 men in Joe Rosenthal's 1945 Iwo Jima flag photo that became a national symbol and powered war bond campaigns. Fame did not protect him from lasting stress, and he died in Arizona in 1955 at age 32 after being found outdoors on a cold night. Lily Chin, the mother of Vincent Chin, breaks down outside Detroit City County building in 1982 after her son was killed in a racially motivated assault. The case helped ignite a new Asian American civil rights movement and drew national attention when the attackers received probation and a fine. Otabenga, a Mbuti man from the Congo region, was taken to the United States and displayed to crowds in the early 1900s, including at the Bronx Zoo. Public outrage later forced his release, but he never made it back to Africa and died in Virginia in 1916. Marvin Gaye Sr. is led away in custody on April 1, 1984, after a family dispute ended in a fatal shooting of singer Marvin Gaye. He later entered a no-contest plea to voluntary manslaughter and received probation instead of prison time. On April 20, 1945, German jet pilot Edward Schallmoser bailed out after a mid-air collision during a fight over Germany. His parachute carried him down into his parents' garden, turning a battlefield escape into a stunned family reunion. This October 16, 1925. New York Times picture shows a New York workshop filled with lifelike mechanical animals, from a tiger to an elephant. It is an early robot zoo made for public displays, decades before modern theme park animatronics made moving animals look normal. Berlin, 1945. A lone horse stands on a tram line between shattered buildings, with power cables hanging overhead. With vehicles scarce and fuel gone, horses pulled carts and helped move supplies, turning one animal into transport and survival in a broken city. This 1880s portrait shows Persian Jewish women wearing layered dresses, coin-trimmed headwear, and face veils that matched local fashion. Their jewelry is not just decoration, it often worked as portable family savings that could be sold fast in an emergency. In December 1944, United States soldiers decorate a Christmas tree in Edren, a captured German town, turning a frontline pause into a home-style ritual. The ornaments are mostly scavenged scraps and small finds, proof that even in war, people still build tiny pockets of normal life. On the Italian front in 1943, American soldiers kneel in the mud while a chaplain celebrates Christmas Mass from a makeshift altar. That single raised hand and small cross show how faith and routine were carried straight into the field, even with danger close by. A German Vi-2 rocket stands at the Blizna test site in Poland in 1943, painted with bold stripes so tracking cameras could measure its spin. Fueled by liquid oxygen and alcohol, the V-2 became the first long-range ballistic rocket, and its design later influenced early space launch technology. In 1917, two Ho children in Ruatahuna, New Zealand, pose outside their school with teachers and Presbyterian missionaries. The image freezes a moment when a remote valley classroom was blending local Maori life with imported lessons that would shape a whole generation. At Peterhof in 1897, Tsar Nicholas II kisses Alexandra, while Grand Duchess Olga dances on the garden steps beside family couples. It is a rare, candid glimpse of the Romanovs as ordinary relatives, just 2 decades before their world collapsed in revolution. This December, 1872, Wandsworth prison photo shows a young detainee in London wearing a number board like a human label. Many pre-Christmas arrests were for stealing food or clothing, revealing how winter and poverty could push people into desperate choices. Violet and Daisy Hilton, conjoined twins born in Brighton in 1908, pose back-to-back while fixing their hair as if mirroring each other. They later toured as performers and even appeared in films, showing how fame could be built from a life where privacy was almost impossible. Ota Benga, a Mbuti man born in 1885 in the Congo region, was brought to the United States and displayed to crowds at the 1904 World's Fair and later at the Bronx Zoo. His story became a lasting warning about how science and entertainment were used to strip real people of dignity. During the Kuwait oil well disaster in 1991, a shepherd guides his flock under a sky darkened by thick smoke. About 600 wells were ignited, and the soot cloud was tracked from space and even cooled daytime temperatures across the region. In 1922, the J.T. Murphy No. 1 oil well near Norphlet, Arkansas exploded, blasting a 450-foot wide, 50-foot deep crater into the ground. It wasn't a meteor, just extreme underground pressure from oil and gas released in seconds. The German Class 19-1001 was an experimental steam locomotive with V-shaped engines driving each axle separately. Only one was built, captured after W. Weitersund, and scrapped in 1952. In 1983, Air Canada Flight 143 lost all engines at 37,000 feet due to a fuel miscalculation. The pilots glided a dead Boeing 767 for 13 minutes and landed it safely, creating the legendary Gimli glider. During the German occupation of France in 1940, Citroën workers secretly sabotaged Nazi vehicles by altering oil dipstick markings. Engines ran with too little oil and failed under stress, without anyone noticing the cause. In 1945, Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten accepted Japan's surrender of Singapore on behalf of Great Britain. The moment marked the official end of Japanese rule in Southeast Asia's key stronghold. Around 1887, Harriet Tubman stands with formerly enslaved people in New York after leading dozens to freedom via the Underground Railroad. She never learned to read, but outsmarted slave catchers and governments alike. Staff Sergeant Reckless was a Mongolian mayor who carried ammo and wounded Marines in the Korean War, making 51 solo supply runs under fire at Outpost Vegas. She was wounded twice, earned 2 Purple Hearts, and became one of the most decorated and legendary war heroes in U.S. Marine Corps history. A Rhodesian soldier pauses for a smoke during the 1970s Bush War, wearing civilian sneakers instead of standard boots. Light footwear was common in counterinsurgency patrols. Speed and silence mattered more than regulation. A rare 1929 photo shows a Jewish woman of the Bnei Korath tribe in what is now Saudi Arabia, wearing a traditional burqa face covering. It documents a nearly vanished Jewish community that existed in Arabia long before modern borders. A diver is prepared for descent into the freezing Arctic Ocean using heavy surface-supplied gear. In near-zero temperatures, minutes of exposure could be fatal, making every dive a calculated risk. On April 30, 1945, an American war photographer bathed in Hitler's Munich apartment just hours after Hitler's suicide. The photo became a stark symbol of total collapse, private space conquered after absolute defeat. Berlin, May 1945, civilians clear rubble by hand after the city's total destruction. Over 70% of central Berlin lay in ruins, and survival began with bare hands and broken streets. During the Great Depression, Al Capone funded soup kitchens and milk programs for children, feeding thousands in Chicago. It was calculated charity, public goodwill from one of America's most ruthless crime bosses. Rock climbing in the 1920s. No helmets, minimal rope, everyday clothing. Early climbers relied on raw strength, trust, and nerve, long before modern safety existed. The 1912 Stockholm Olympics pentathlon fencing event, possibly featuring future U.S. General George S. Patton. Before tanks and W.Y. Nosna fame, Patton was an Olympic athlete and elite swordsman. In the 1950s, Dr. Min Chiu Lee cured a cancer patient with chemotherapy for the first time in history. He was fired for unauthorized experimentation, only to be proven right when the patient remained cancer-free. The RMS Olympic, Titanic's sister ship, earned a reputation for ramming, sinking a German U-boat in WWI, and surviving multiple collisions. She alone completed a full career, proving the design's strength after Titanic and Britannic were both lost early. During the Greco-Italian War, 1940-41, Greek troops captured so many Italian vehicles that they improvised their first armored unit. The sight of these vehicles nearly triggered a panic retreat in Italian rear defenses, who believed a major breakthrough had occurred. Germany, 1945, an elderly Volkssturm conscript armed with a Tankgewehr M1918, a World War I anti-tank rifle. By the war's end, Germany was so desperate it sent old men with obsolete weapons to face modern armies. 1918, early facial prosthetics were handcrafted for World War I soldiers with severe facial injuries. Artists and surgeons worked together, creating lifelike masks decades before modern reconstructive surgery existed. Murmansk, 1942, over 75% of the city was destroyed by air raids, yet it never fell. Despite the ruins, the Arctic port kept running, feeding the Soviet war effort through Allied supply routes. Cold War U.S. propaganda. If Russia wins, American men will be sterilized. Fear, not facts, extreme psychological warfare aimed at mass panic and obedience. August 19, 1919, British motor torpedo boats sank the training ship Pamyat Azova during a daring raid on Kronstadt Harbor. It proved small, fast boats could cripple capital ships, reshaping naval warfare. Moscow, 1935. The first Soviet stars are installed atop the Kremlin towers, replacing imperial eagles. Each star weighed over a ton, turning architecture into pure political symbolism. Paris, 1871. A communard woman stands armed, reading an official proclamation during the Paris Commune. Women fought on the barricades, ran hospitals, and were later executed or exiled en masse after the uprising was crushed. Spring 1945, the British Army dismantles mountains of destroyed vehicles at a repair depot in Belgium. Prisoners of war stripped tanks and trucks for scrap, marking the moment when total war turned into industrial cleanup. World War I, an Austro-Hungarian Škoda siege, gun-firing 12-inch shells designed to smash fortresses. Each shell weighed over 300 kilos, turning concrete defenses into rubble within hours. New York, 1925. Police display a club bat hybrid weapon confiscated from street gangs. Improvised weapons like this were common before modern gun laws, built for maximum damage at close range. Johannesburg Hospital, 1905. Early X-ray imaging with almost no radiation protection. Operators wore lead aprons and masks, but patients were fully exposed, years before the dangers of X-rays were understood. Guadalcanal, Christmas 1943. A U.S. soldier dressed as Santa hands gifts to wounded Marines between battles. Even on one of Dobodobobake's deadliest islands, the front line paused briefly for morale and humanity. Leningrad, February 3, 1942. Baker Daniil Kutanin died of starvation at his oven during the siege. He baked bread daily, smelled it constantly, and never took a single crumb, because each loaf meant someone else survived. 1980. Detroit gave Saddam Hussein the key to the city, while the U.S. backed Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War. A man later declared an enemy was officially honored on American soil. Juan Pujol Garcia, Garbo, invented an entire spy network that never existed and convinced Nazi Germany it was real. A civilian acting alone, he fed Berlin fake intelligence so effectively that it helped mislead the Nazis about D-Day, making him one of W. Weintaun's most successful double agents. East Berlin, June 1991. Marx and Lenin portraits thrown into a school dumpster. What had been mandatory state ideology for children collapsed so completely it was discarded without ceremony. Rosemary Kennedy, sister of JFK and RFK, was given a forced lobotomy at age 23 in 1941 to control mood swings. The procedure failed catastrophically. She was left permanently disabled and hidden from the public for decades. 1961, Adolf Eichmann, architect of the Holocaust's deportation system, paces a prison yard in Israel. Captured by Mossad in Argentina, he was tried in a televised trial and hanged in 1962, Israel's only civilian execution. On July 28, 1994, Dr. John Britton posed with a .357 Magnum he carried for protection while working at an abortion clinic in Pensacola. The next day, he and his bodyguard were killed outside the clinic, a stark reminder that even armed precautions couldn't stop targeted political violence. In 1966, Mao Zedong swam across the Yangtze River in Wuhan to project strength during the launch of the Cultural Revolution. The staged swim was propaganda, meant to show the 72-year-old leader as physically unstoppable. July 1944, V-2 rocket guidance systems assembled at the underground Mittelwerk factory near Nordhausen. This was the world's first ballistic missile, built with forced labor, foreshadowing the modern missile age.